February 14, 1943, 9:17 a.m., above the steaming jungles of the Solomon Islands. The sky over Bougainville is a hard, merciless blue. Below, the airstrip at Munda shimmers in the heat. Off to the northwest, near the massive Japanese stronghold of Rabaul, a formation of Mitsubishi fighters claws for altitude. Inside the lead cockpit, Petty Officer First Class Kenji Nakamura tightens his oxygen mask and squints into the sun. His aircraft, the sleek, razor-nosed Mitsubishi A6M Zero, has ruled these skies since 1941. From Pearl Harbor to the Coral Sea, it has outturned, outclimbed, and outlasted nearly everything the Americans could throw at it. Below him, someone on the radio chuckles. They've brought the bent wing again. The Americans call it the Corsair. Officially, it's the Vought F4U Corsair, but Japanese pilots have another name for it, the whistling coffin. Its long nose blocks the pilot's forward view. Its landing gear bounces like a mule on carrier decks. And early intelligence reports, translated and circulated through naval air groups, describe it as unstable, difficult, dangerous. There are stories. American carrier captains refusing to deploy it, pilots ground looping into parked aircraft, crashes on landing. Compared to the nimble Zero, it seems crude, overpowered, unrefined. Nakamura smiles thinly as black specks materialize against the southern horizon. The Corsairs are coming in low, sunlight flashing off their inverted gull wings. They look awkward in silhouette, like something designed by committee rather than instinct. But they are fast. Even from miles away, that is obvious. The Japanese formation turns to intercept. Altitude, 18,000 feet. Airspeed building, the sun to their backs. The Zero pilots expect what they always get, an American fighter that tries to turn with them and dies for the mistake. But this time, something is different. The Corsairs don't climb to meet them. They dive. The lead Marine pilot, First Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh of VMF 124, pushes his throttle forward until the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine howls. 18 cylinders, 2,000 horsepower. The aircraft trembles, then lunges like a predator slipping its leash. You can almost feel it, the vibration through the stick, the wind screaming over the canopy. Walsh doesn't turn, he doesn't dogfight. He slashes. The Corsair's 650 caliber Browning machine guns ignite in unison. Tracer rounds rip through the sky in a tight, lethal stream. A Zero explodes in a burst of orange flame before its pilot even realizes he's under fire. Nakamura jerks his stick, trying to roll into a defensive spiral. The Corsair flashes past him at impossible speed, climbing vertically, engine roaring like thunder. The American doesn't follow into a turn. He goes up, straight up, bleeding speed but converting momentum into altitude. It's something the Zero cannot match. Within seconds, the sky is chaos. Corsairs diving in pairs, firing, climbing away, never lingering. The Japanese pilots try to respond with instinct, tight turns, horizontal maneuvers, baiting the Americans into a dogfight. But the Corsairs refuse the invitation. Instead, they dictate the fight. Speed, firepower, altitude. Another Zero disintegrates under concentrated gunfire. A third trails smoke spiraling toward the jungle canopy. Nakamura hears shouting on the radio now, not laughter, urgency. The Americans are not fighting the way they're supposed to. They are hunting. For over a year, Japanese naval aviation has enjoyed a myth of superiority. The Zero's turning radius, its feather-light controls, its combat record, these have become articles of faith. American pilots were thought to be brave but predictable, their machines heavy and inelegant. The Corsair was supposed to be one of those machines. Instead, it is something else entirely. Below, one Marine pilot banks hard and lines up a fourth Zero, attempting to escape east. He squeezes the trigger, a short burst. The enemy aircraft shears apart mid-air, fragments tumbling like confetti. 4 Zeros down in less than 10 minutes. The Japanese formation breaks. Nakamura dives for cloud cover, heart hammering against his ribs. He risks one glance over his shoulder and sees a Corsair perched above him, higher, faster, patient, waiting. In that moment, the laughter dies. Because the aircraft they dismissed as clumsy is controlling the vertical dimension of the battle. It is deciding when to engage, when to withdraw, and how the fight will unfold. And this is only the beginning. By the time the surviving Zeros limp back toward Rabaul, something fundamental has shifted in the Pacific sky. Word will spread quickly through ready rooms and briefing huts. The bent wing fighter is not to be underestimated. It is not a dogfighter in the old sense. It is a predator built for energy warfare, and the Marines flying it are learning fast. What began as mockery is turning into something far more dangerous. Respect, but the transformation of the Corsair from unreliable outcast to aerial executioner did not happen overnight. It began with failure and with humiliation. The humiliation came not in combat, but on the deck of a carrier. September 1942, USS Sangamon, Caribbean training waters. The sea is calm, the sky forgiving. The Corsair approaches at 85 knots. Lieutenant Commander Richard Crommelin watches from the island structure, arms folded. The Navy had high hopes for the new fighter. Built by Vought, the F4U promised raw speed over 400 miles per hour, making it the fastest American fighter yet placed into production. On paper, it was revolutionary. In practice, it was a problem. The pilot eases the throttle back. The Corsair's massive 13-foot propeller, so large it required that distinctive, inverted gull wing just to clear the deck, beats the air with visible force. The nose stretches long and predatory ahead of the cockpit, obscuring forward visibility. From the LSO's paddles, hand signals flash, too high, correcting, too fast. Wave off, but it's too late. The Corsair slams onto the deck, its stiff landing gear compressing and rebounding like a coiled spring. The aircraft bounces, once, twice, skips over arresting wires, veers left. The port wing clips a parked Wildcat. Metal shrieks, props shatter. The Corsair slews sideways and grinds to a halt in a shower of sparks. Silence. Then the smell of fuel. It wasn't an isolated incident. Early carrier trials revealed a brutal truth. The Corsair was difficult, sometimes treacherous, to land at sea. Its long nose hid the deck during final approach. Its powerful engine created torque that pulled the aircraft left at low speeds. The landing gear had a tendency to rebound violently, causing the aircraft to float over arrestor cables. Worse still, the right wing would sometimes stall before the left at slow speeds, snapping the aircraft into an unexpected roll just as the pilot committed to landing. In war, unpredictability kills. By early 1943, after a series of accidents and near disasters, the U.S. Navy made a quiet but consequential decision. The Corsair would be withdrawn from frontline carrier operations for now. Instead, it would be sent ashore, to the Marines. It was a subtle demotion. Carrier decks were the center of naval prestige. To be carrier qualified was to be elite. The Corsair, despite its speed, had failed its first real test. Across the Pacific, Japanese intelligence officers intercepted fragments of these reports. Through observation and captured documents, they learned that the Americans were struggling with their new fighter. They noted its accidents, its grounding. To experienced Zero pilots stationed at Rabaul and Leh, this confirmed their assumptions. The Corsair was flawed. Meanwhile, on a dusty, half-finished strip carved out of the jungle at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, Marine pilots saw things differently. They didn't care about carrier landings. They cared about survival. Major William Gies, commanding officer of VMF 124, gathered his men beneath a canvas awning as mechanics swarmed over the new arrivals. The Corsairs looked enormous compared to the stubby Wildcats they replaced. Long-nosed, aggressive, blue-gray paint already streaked with oil. "These aren't Wildcats," Easy told them, "and they're not Zeros." He paused. "They're faster than anything out there, so don't you dare turn with a Zero." It was a doctrinal shift. For 2 years, American pilots had tried to match Japanese fighters in horizontal maneuvering combat, and paid dearly. Now, with the Corsair, a different philosophy emerged. Fight in the vertical, maintain speed, attack from above, extend away before the enemy can react. Energy fighting? The Corsair's Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine gave it unmatched acceleration in a dive. Its rugged airframe could absorb punishment that would tear a Zero apart, and those 650 caliber machine guns, mounted in the wings with ample ammunition, delivered sustained, concentrated firepower. But it required discipline. It required restraint. It required resisting the primal urge to turn into the enemy. The first weeks were uneven. Some Marine pilots reverted to instinct and found themselves struggling against lighter Japanese fighters, but others adapted. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh adapted. So did Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, who would later command VMF 214, the Black Sheep Squadron. They discovered something remarkable. At 20,000 feet, the Corsair was untouchable by a Zero in a climb. In a dive, it could exceed 450 miles per hour, speeds that made control surfaces stiffen and engines scream. The Zero, lightly built and lacking armor, could not follow safely. The Americans began to fight like falcons. Climb, observe, dive, strike, climb again. And with each engagement, Japanese losses mounted. Yet skepticism lingered among Navy officers, among rival squadrons, even among some Marines. The Corsair was still considered temperamental, difficult, dangerous to its own pilots. Back at Rabaul, intelligence summaries dismissed its impact as situational, effective only when diving. The Zero, they insisted, retained superiority in maneuverability. The laughter had quieted but not stopped. They believed the Corsair's dominance was a fluke of tactics. They believed that once Japanese pilots adjusted, the balance would restore itself. They were wrong, because in the skies over the Solomons, something irreversible was happening. The Americans were no longer reacting. They were innovating, and the Corsair, once rejected by carriers and ridiculed by adversaries, was about to become the most feared aircraft in the theater. But first, it would have to survive its trial by fire. April 7, 1943, 11:42 a.m., the slot north of Guadalcanal. The ocean below is a sheet of hammered steel. Sunlight fractures across its surface as 20 Japanese aircraft streak south, bombers in tight formation, escorted by Zeros fanned wide like hunting dogs. Their target, Allied shipping, pushing supplies into the Solomon chain. On the radio at Henderson Field, a terse call crackles through static. Raid inbound, Angels 20, Vector 085. In the ready tent, chairs scrape violently across wooden planks. Pilots run. Engines cough to life in violent succession. The Corsairs roll. VMF 124 claws into the sky, heavy with fuel but hungry for altitude. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh pushes his throttle forward until the R-2800 bellows like artillery. The aircraft shudders, then steadies. The bent wings bite into the air. Up, higher. Below them, the Japanese formation holds discipline. The bombers, Mitsubishi G4Ms, long and fragile, are guarded by veteran Zero pilots, many with victories stretching back to 1941. They've seen Wildcats. They've outmaneuvered P-39s. They expect resistance. They do not expect what comes next. At 24,000 feet, the Corsairs level briefly. Walsh glances across at his wingman and tilts his wings twice, a silent signal. Then they roll inverted. The world flips, and gravity takes over. The Corsairs plunge. Wind screams over the canopy, tearing at rivets. The airspeed needle spins past 400 miles per hour. The Japanese formation grows rapidly in the gun sight, calm, unaware. Walsh picks a Zero escort on the outer edge. He fires at 300 yards. 6 Brownings erupt. The sound is not a chatter, it's a continuous ripping roar. Tracers converge. The Zero disintegrates mid-roll, its fuselage shredding under concentrated fire. No warning, no turn fight, just annihilation. Below, confusion detonates inside the Japanese formation. Corsairu, Corsairu! Zeros break upward instinctively, trying to climb into the attackers. But the Corsairs are already past them, already pulling up, engines straining as they convert blistering dive speed into altitude. The American fighters arc skyward in a smooth, predatory climb. A Zero attempts pursuit. It stalls first. The American aircraft, heavier and more powerful, keeps climbing. You can almost feel the shift in the cockpit of that Zero, the sudden realization that the vertical escape route is gone. Walsh rolls over the top and dives again. This time he targets a bomber. The Mitsubishi G4M, nicknamed Betty by the Allies, was built for range, not durability. It carries no armor plating, minimal self-sealing fuel protection. It is fast for its size, but vulnerable. Walsh's guns rake across its starboard wing. Fuel ignites instantly. The bomber erupts into flame, shearing apart in seconds. Around him, other Corsairs execute the same pattern. Dive, fire, climb. Never linger. Never turn horizontally. The Japanese Zeros attempt to tighten into spirals, hoping to bait the Americans into their preferred dance. But the Corsair pilots ignore the invitation. They refuse the duel. Instead, they attack again from above. Within minutes, the sky is fractured into individual chases. Smoke trails corkscrew downward toward the sea. Radio traffic becomes desperate. Petty Officer Nakamura, back in the fight, tries to close on a climbing Corsair, pushing his Zero beyond recommended limits. The engine strains. The airframe vibrates. He's close, so close. Then the Corsair rolls over and dives again, vanishing with terrifying acceleration. Nakamura can't follow. He's forced to level out. For the first time since 1941, he feels something unfamiliar in combat. Helplessness. Below, 3 bombers burn. 2 Zeros are falling in pieces. The remaining Japanese formation fractures and retreats north toward Rabaul. The Corsairs pursue only briefly, just long enough to ensure the raid collapses. Then they climb again, reforming with cold precision. Total engagement time, less than 15 minutes. Japanese losses catastrophic. American losses, none. Back at Henderson Field, the Marines taxi in with engines ticking hot. Ground crews swarm the aircraft, counting bullet holes. There are few. Mechanics slap the Corsair's flanks as if congratulating a prizefighter. Inside the Japanese briefing room at Rabaul, the tone is very different. Debriefings reveal a pattern. The Corsair does not dogfight conventionally. It controls speed and altitude. It absorbs damage that would cripple a Zero. Its firepower destroys aircraft in seconds. And perhaps most alarming, it is flown by pilots who have adapted quickly. What began as mockery has turned into analysis. What was dismissed as awkward is now identified as lethal. Reports begin circulating through Japanese naval aviation units. Avoid vertical pursuit of the F4U. Do not engage in extended dives. Force it into turning combat. But doctrine on paper is one thing. Reality at 400 miles per hour is another. Over the next 3 months, kill ratios begin to tilt dramatically. In certain engagements, Corsair units claim 5-to-1 victories. Experienced Japanese aviators, men who once hunted wildcats with ease, are being shot down before they can bring their strengths to bear. The Pacific sky is changing, not gradually, violently, and the psychological impact may be even greater than the tactical one. Because the Corsair is not just winning, it is humiliating. But dominance in war is fragile. Aircraft can be upgraded, tactics can evolve, reinforcements can arrive. The question now is whether the Corsair's rise is temporary or whether it signals a permanent shift in aerial supremacy across the Pacific. The answer will come in blood. September 12, 1943, 4:36 p.m. over Kahili Airfield, southern Bougainville. Cloud cover hangs low, bruised and heavy. Below, the Japanese runway at Kahili is alive with movement, mechanics scrambling, anti-aircraft guns pivoting skyward. Then the radar warning comes too late. High above the cloud layer, 16 Corsairs from VMF 214 slice south in tight formation. On the lead aircraft's canopy rail, a small black sheep insignia is painted beneath the cockpit. At the controls is Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington. Boyington is not a textbook Marine officer. He's brash, older than most of his pilots, a former member of the American Volunteer Group in China, a man with something to prove. And today he intends to prove it. The squadron, soon to be known as the Black Sheep, had been assembled from replacements and misfits, pilots without a home, aircraft others didn't want. The Corsair fit the pattern perfectly. As they approach Bougainville, Boyington's voice crackles across the radio. Remember, no turning contests, we hit and climb. Below them, Japanese fighters scramble, Zeros clawing into the sky in defensive arcs. Many of these pilots are veterans of China, Guadalcanal, New Guinea. They've adjusted their tactics. They've been briefed on the Corsair's dive speed and climb. They're ready for a different kind of fight, or so they think. Boyington pushes his nose down through a gap in the clouds. The Corsairs follow like falling knives. The dive is steeper than before, faster. They aim not just for the escorts, but for the runway itself. At 2,000 feet, Boyington levels just enough to rake a parked aircraft with .50 caliber fire. Fuel explodes along the tarmac. Mechanics scatter. A second Corsair tears through a cluster of grounded fighters, setting 2 ablaze before pulling hard into a vertical climb. Japanese Zeros converge from both flanks. This time they don't chase upward blindly. They split. Two climb cautiously, two remain level, anticipating the Corsair's return dive. The sky becomes layered with intersecting paths, horizontal and vertical lines crossing like a web. Lieutenant James Hill banks sharply as a Zero slips behind him. For a split second, instinct whispers, "Turn." He resists it. Instead, he drops his nose and accelerates. The Corsair responds instantly. Its engine roars with brutal force, propeller biting thick tropical air. Hill feels the G-forces build as he dives, faster, faster, until the Zero behind him begins to fade. Then Hill pulls up, converting speed into altitude once more. The Zero cannot match the climb. At the top of the arc, Hill rolls and dives directly onto the pursuing fighter. The Japanese pilot never sees it coming. A short burst. Pieces scatter across the sky. Below, anti-aircraft fire thickens. Black puffs of flak bloom around the Corsairs as they make repeated slashing attacks against both airborne fighters and the airfield itself. For 30 minutes, the battle churns. Japanese pilots attempt coordinated traps, forcing one Corsair low while another tries to intercept from above. But the Americans maintain discipline. They fight in pairs. They cover each other's climbs. And crucially, they choose when to disengage. By the time Boyington signals withdrawal, smoke columns rise from Kahili. Several Zeros lie shattered on the strip. Others fall burning into the jungle. Back at base, the kill claims are staggering. And more importantly, the trend is undeniable. VMF 214 begins posting kill ratios that echo through the Pacific theater. Marine squadrons equipped with the Vought F4U Corsair are achieving dominance not just tactically, but psychologically. Japanese after-action reports grow increasingly blunt. The enemy fighter possesses superior speed in dive and climb. It avoids horizontal maneuvering combat. It attacks in coordinated pairs, and then a line that appears more than once. Engagement not recommended unless advantage certain. That sentence matters because it signals something profound. For 2 years, Japanese aviators had entered combat expecting superiority. Now, caution creeps into their doctrine. Hesitation enters their decision-making loop. In aerial warfare, a half-second of doubt can mean death. By late 1943, the balance of air power over the Solomons shifts decisively. American supply lines stabilize. Amphibious operations gain critical air cover. Japanese reinforcement efforts become increasingly costly. The Corsair is no longer an experiment. It is an instrument of control. And, ironically, the aircraft once deemed too dangerous for carrier decks is proving perfectly suited to the brutal improvisation of island warfare. Rough airstrips, rapid sorties, aggressive hit-and-run tactics. Its flaws on carriers had masked its strengths in combat. But the story isn't finished. Because even as the Marines master the Corsair from land bases, engineers and naval officers are quietly solving its original problem: the bouncing landings, the hidden deck, the carrier rejection. If they succeed, if the Corsair returns to the fleet, then the Pacific War will face something entirely new. A fighter that dominates from both island and sea. And when that happens, the laughter will disappear for good. January 25, 1944, 3:12 p.m. aboard the deck of the USS Essex, Western Pacific. The sea is restless. Swells rise and fall beneath 27,000 tons of steel. Signal flags snap in the wind. The deck crew crouches low as another fighter approaches from the port quarter. But this time, the silhouette is unmistakable. Bent wings, long nose. The Corsair is back. Months earlier, naval engineers and test pilots had refused to give up on the aircraft's carrier potential. Modifications were subtle but decisive. The landing gear struts were reinforced and adjusted to reduce bounce. The oleo struts were recalibrated. A small spoiler strip was added to the starboard wing to correct the abrupt stall that had plagued early approaches. Most importantly, a new landing technique was standardized. Instead of a straight-in approach that left the deck hidden behind the Corsair's long nose, pilots were trained to fly a continuous curved descent, keeping the carrier deck in sight out the left side of the canopy all the way to touchdown. It was counterintuitive. It worked. On final approach, Lieutenant Ira Kepford banks gently left, holding a steady rate of descent. The landing signal officer tracks him through binoculars. "Come left, steady, cut." The Corsair drops onto the deck. The landing gear compresses. No violent rebound, no skip. The tail hook catches the third arresting wire with a metallic snap. The aircraft jolts to a halt. Silence. Then cheers erupt from deck crew and pilots alike. The fighter once labeled too dangerous for carrier operations has just landed cleanly in open ocean conditions. It won't be the last. Within months, Corsairs are operating not only from marine strips across the Solomons, but also from fast carrier task forces pushing west toward the Marianas and the Philippines. British carrier groups in the Pacific Fleet adopt the aircraft as well, refining landing procedures even further. And now, something unprecedented happens. The Corsair's dominance, once localized to island campaigns, becomes mobile. It can appear anywhere. June 19, 1944, the Philippine Sea. Japanese naval aviation gathers what remains of its carrier-trained air crews for a decisive confrontation. The engagement will later be nicknamed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. American radar detects incoming waves long before they reach striking distance. Combat air patrols launch from carrier decks in disciplined sequence. Among them, Corsairs. The sky over the fleet fills with contrails and engine smoke. Japanese aircraft press forward, Zeros, dive bombers, torpedo planes, many flown by increasingly inexperienced pilots. They expect a fight. They get a slaughter. The Corsair's speed advantage is now compounded by radar-directed interceptions and veteran American air crews hardened by 2 years of combat. Dive and climb tactics are executed with mechanical precision. Japanese aircraft disintegrate in midair under concentrated .50 caliber fire. Some attempt desperate evasive turns, but the Corsair no longer needs to avoid turning entirely. Against late-war Japanese pilots and worn aircraft, it can afford aggression. It has the engine power to recover. It has armor protection its opponent lacks. It has self-sealing fuel tanks that absorb hits, which would have turned earlier American fighters into fireballs. By sunset, hundreds of Japanese aircraft are lost. Carrier decks that once launched proud air groups now struggle to land scattered survivors. The psychological axis of the Pacific War tilts permanently. In ready rooms across the fleet, pilots speak openly now. The Corsair isn't just fast, it's dominant. Its kill ratios against Japanese aircraft climb to levels that echo through intelligence briefings. Marine and Navy units report 5-to-1, even 10-to-1 outcomes in certain engagements. And the aircraft's reputation transforms accordingly. No longer the whistling coffin. Now, among Japanese pilots, it earns a different nickname, Death from Above. But the transformation isn't only technical or tactical, it's symbolic. Because in 1942, the Zero represented Japanese expansion, speed, surprise, superiority. It was the blade that cut through unprepared defenses from Pearl Harbor to Singapore. By 1944, the Corsair represents the reversal. Industrial power, adaptation, relentless improvement. The Americans didn't discard the aircraft when it faltered. They refined it. They changed their tactics. They learned. And that learning curve, steeper than any climb rate, may have mattered more than horsepower. Yet even as the Corsair dominates the Pacific skies, the war grinds on toward its brutal conclusion. Kamikaze attacks will test its pilots in new ways. Night fighting, ground attack missions, close air support over Iwo Jima and Okinawa rolls far beyond its original design, await. The Corsair's story isn't just about defeating the Zero. It's about evolving beyond the duel entirely. And as 1945 approaches, the aircraft once mocked becomes something no one laughs at anymore. It becomes inevitable. April 3, 1945, 6:18 a.m., off the coast of Okinawa. Low clouds drift over a gray sea. The fleet below is immense. Rows of carriers, battleships, destroyers, an armada assembled for the final push toward Japan itself. Radar operators tense, bogies inbound, multiple, low altitude. They're not coming to dogfight, they're coming to die. Kamikaze aircraft, many obsolete trainers, and worn fighters skim the wave tops, weaving through flak bursts. Some are flown by barely trained students, others by veterans making a final, deliberate choice. From the decks of American carriers, fighters launch in urgent sequence, among them the Corsair. Lieutenant Commander James Flatley watches through binoculars as bent-wing silhouettes climb into the morning haze. The aircraft that once struggled to land here now forms the outer shield of the fleet. A Japanese aircraft bursts from cloud cover at 1,000 feet, angling directly toward a destroyer picket. Its engine howls, its wings wobble under turbulence. A Corsair drops behind it. The pilot hesitates for only a fraction of a second, long enough to confirm the intent. Then he fires. The .50 caliber rounds tear through the fuselage. The kamikaze erupts in flame before it can descend into its target. Debris rains harmlessly into the sea. Another attacker dives steeply toward a carrier. Two Corsairs intercept from opposite angles. One fires high, the other low. The Japanese aircraft disintegrates mid-dive, its explosion lighting the cloud deck orange. The fleet survives the morning, and the afternoon, and the weeks that follow. Over Okinawa, Corsairs perform roles far removed from the early dogfights over the Solomons. They provide close air support for Marines fighting inland. They strafe artillery positions. They intercept suicide aircraft. They operate from carriers and rough island strips alike. They have become universal tools of air power. By now, Japanese naval aviation bears little resemblance to the confident force that once laughed at the Corsair's awkward shape. Veteran aviators are gone, lost over Rabaul, Bougainville, the Philippine Sea. Replacements fly with minimal training hours, facing opponents hardened by years of combat. The duel that defined 1943 has dissolved into something asymmetrical, yet memory lingers. Among surviving Japanese pilots, stories circulate of the early days, of the first encounters with the bent-wing fighter that refused to turn, that climbed out of reach, that struck from above and vanished. The aircraft they thought clumsy, the one grounded from carriers, the one dismissed as inferior in a turning fight. In total, the Vought F4U Corsair will achieve one of the most lopsided air-to-air kill ratios of the war, over 11-to-1 against Japanese aircraft by conservative estimates. More than 12,000 units will be built. It will serve not just in World War II, but in Korea and beyond. But numbers only tell part of the story, because the Corsair's real victory was psychological. It shattered an illusion. For 2 years, the Mitsubishi A6M Zero had embodied Japanese aerial dominance. Agile, elegant, feared. The Corsair didn't outturn it, it outgrew it. It forced a new style of warfare, one built on energy, teamwork, and industrial adaptation. It punished rigidity. It rewarded innovation. And perhaps most importantly, it proved that first impressions in war can be catastrophically wrong. Back in early 1943, when Japanese pilots laughed at the bent-wing silhouette cutting through the sky, they were judging it by familiar standards. Turning radius, agility, tradition. They were fighting the last war in their minds. The Americans, by contrast, were learning to fight the next one. And in that shift from horizontal duels to vertical dominance, the balance of the Pacific sky tipped permanently. On the final day of the war, as engines fall silent and aircraft line carrier decks in neat rows, the Corsair sits among them, oil-streaked, battle-worn, unmistakable. Its wings still bent. Its reputation transformed. The laughter is gone. In its place stands something far more enduring: respect.